The religious really love to pretend that everybody misunderstands them, but that's rarely ever true, is it? They just misunderstand reality, or more often they just ignore it because they just really want to believe. And we're going to see yet another example of that coming up next. This is a video from a channel called Cave to the Cross Apologetics. And this is another video where almost everybody in the comments, they're atheists, pointing out just how terrible the thinking is in this video, which I guess we're all pretty used to by now. I just want you to understand what we're getting into as we go on. So, are these going to be false criticisms of classical apologetics? I somehow doubt it, but, what do I know, right? Let's go see for ourselves.
And so it says some of the potential weaknesses here. So during the past 2 centuries, the classical approach has come under increasing fire, both from outside the church and from within.
Obviously, we're starting in the middle of a thought, which in the few videos from this channel that I've looked at, that seems to be how they do things. Okay, I'm sure we'll figure out what's going on as time goes on. At least, I hope so. This is something else that I've seen a lot of late. People who will do, podcasts maybe, whatever this is, then they will just randomly take parts of the podcast and stick it on YouTube without making the argument make any sense in and of itself. They're just throwing things up at random and hoping that the audience can figure it out. And as we know, sometimes they start and end in the middle of a sentence or sometimes in the middle of a word. And that's not a good way to do decent video editing, is it? But anyway, we'll muddle through, so let's get back at it.
As the near consensus of Christian worldview has been eroded and broken down by the onslaught of secularism and humanism in the West, many Christians have concluded that the classical approach has some significant problems, or at least limitations.
Thanks for reading from your screen. See, that's where they should have started, instead of the whole half-thought thing that they did, but I digress. The problem with all of this, and this is going to be really obvious, I figure, as we move on, but it's the same problem that the religious always have, starting with the conclusion that they reached for entirely emotional reasons and entirely refusing to evaluate it critically or rationally. It's, here's all this stuff that never made sense, but we really like the idea, and now that people are criticizing it, and rightfully so, it's making us feel bad. Well, too bad. If they had started off looking at their beliefs critically, then they probably wouldn't be in this situation to begin with. This is going to be another one of those look behind the curtain things, where the religious talk to each other about the things that they really want to believe, so they're just going to assume that everything they already believe must be true because they wanna. And we're not going to do that, are we? So please, whoever you are, it says nothing in the description about who these two are. It doesn't really matter though, so whatever. So guy on the left and guy on the right, please continue.
Right. And so the first thing they want us to do is to see that there are some common criticisms of this approach that are based on clear and outright misunderstanding. So these are false criticisms of the approach that they want us to see first. These are criticisms that they suggest don't even work, right?
Why don't they work? Oh, I know you don't want them to work because you're emotionally wedded to the ideas, but that doesn't mean the criticisms aren't real. It doesn't mean they're not valid. Of course, we see this all the time too, don't we? It always turns into, these are things that I already believe on faith, so it just has to be true. I'm only going to look at the criticisms from my current perspective, which I can't justify or provide any evidence for, but I still really like it, so any criticism is just wrong. But that's not how things work, do they? This is why people need to constantly challenge their own preconceptions. A thing isn't true because you want it to be true. It's true only if the evidence shows that it is, and those conclusions are only provisional because we find out new things all the time. Every time we find something new, we ought to be able to put our beliefs to the test, no matter how personally devastating it might be to find out that what we've believed all along is just wrong. The truth doesn't care about your fee-fees. It's time to grow the hell up.
So classical apologists, for instance, do not claim that one must believe in God or in Christ on the basis of rational arguments to be justified in believing.
And you've just spelled out why classical apologetics, in fact, all apologetics, is just worthless. Because you have no business believing anything without evidence. And I can't tell you how many times I've had a discussion with a theist, and they've said, "You believe things without evidence?" Really? Name one. Just one thing that I accept as factually true that I have absolutely no evidence to support. Virtually everything that I accept has evidence, and in the very few, in fact, I can only think of one case where it doesn't, they have to accept the same thing as well, so they can't criticize that. Go ahead, and they can never come up with one. They just get frustrated because after a while, they realize that they've got nothing and their claim is just false. I can point to evidence for just about everything in my head, and where I can't, like I can't prove that I exist or the universe is real, that pesky problem of hard solipsism rears its ugly head again, and I admit that. But anything in that range, yeah, I will admit it because, hey, they have to do the same thing. Otherwise, why are we having this conversation? You have to start somewhere, and if we can't agree that the things that we seemingly experience in common actually happen, then there can be no more discussion about anything. You are not justified in believing anything without evidence beyond that. At all, ever. And religion absolutely requires that, doesn't it?
Or to have a proper faith.
There's no such thing. Biblical faith, which is faith defined by Hebrews 11:1, the only place in the Bible where faith is directly defined at all, is not rational. It's all, here's the stuff we really wish was true, and nothing at all about verifying it objectively. The Bible never mentions actually caring about reality, only being afraid of it. So this is not a good place to start, as if we are at all surprised by that.
What they maintain is that for such belief to be rational, there must be somewhere a rational ground of that belief in truth.
And I would agree. So where is yours? This is about the place where I figure he's going to start saying rationality is unimportant when it comes to faith, which is like saying guilt or innocence is unimportant when it comes to deciding a court case. If you are not starting with the truth, and by truth I mean things that are actually so in the reality that we all agree that we share, then you're just making a fool of yourself. It's why belief means nothing if what you believe isn't actually going on. Saying, I believe that unicorns control the government and everyone will vote for is actually a cleverly disguised goblin. Then you're not talking about truth, you're talking about delusion. And how much difference is there between that and what most Christians are saying? Really, be honest.
Even if the believer may not be aware of that grounding or be able to articulate it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So notice the idea here is that you don't have to believe or, in God or in Christ on the basis of rational arguments, right? There are believers that believe that don't know any arguments or don't know any good arguments.
Then they shouldn't believe it, because every individual is personally responsible for having rational reasons to believe the things that they believe. They must have good reasons to make good choices, and if they don't, then their entire epistemology is suspect. When we ask them why they believe on the basis of 1 Peter 3:15, they should have an answer that includes solid, defensible, demonstrable evidence. And if they don't, then they shouldn't believe it to begin with. When we say, what convinced you, it should be a whole lot more than, I have a feeling. Yet that's what most of them say, right? William Lane Craig's Witness of the Holy Spirit is really no more than that. He just has a feeling. He just really likes the idea. But really liking the idea means nothing, does it? Really liking the idea that there are body thetans that can be eliminated through auditing to make you a better person, that doesn't make any of that nonsense true. This is why the religious fail as much as they do, because they can't understand what they're doing wrong.
But that doesn't mean that they can't have belief in Christ, right?
No, it just means they shouldn't. I've seen this more times than I care to mention, where the theist will get mad. Well, you can't take away my faith. You can't tell me that I can't believe. No, I'm telling you that you shouldn't believe on the basis of the entire lack of corroboratory evidence that you can present. You're not giving me a good reason why you believe, and that's a problem. But they're good enough for me. Yeah, that's not saying a lot, sadly. That is exactly why these problems arise. You have a terrible epistemic standard, and you just don't care. We're just pointing out why your standards are poor, and you're just crying like a 2-year-old about getting called out on it. And that's not something you should be proud of. It just isn't.
And so the claim that classicalists say you have to believe based on rational arguments is a misnomer. It misses what they're attempting to say, right? It's a misunderstanding of the approach.
Yeah.
Now, I have no idea what he's really trying to say here because he gives no details. And if people are claiming that classical apologetics is saying a thing that it isn't actually saying, then sure, those people are wrong. However, relying on classical apologetics, or any apologetics for that matter, when it isn't leading you down a rational path, then that's just you doing intelligence wrong. Saying, I'm following the God of classical theism, doesn't put you in any more rational a camp than saying, I believe in invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies. This is another place, and I have no idea if this fits into what he's going for, but I've pointed it out before, where watching the religious embrace anything old as if it's more true because it's old, that really makes no sense at all. It's where they embrace people like Augustine and Anselm, people like that, not because they said anything worthwhile, which demonstrably they didn't, but because, well, they've just been around so long and are so well known and well respected by the faith that whatever they said, well, it's just got to be gospel truth. But that's not how this works, is it? Absolutely nothing should ever be accepted without critical scrutiny. Nothing from anyone ever. I don't care who said a thing. That thing is still only true if it's actually defensibly true. And the religious don't tend to like that, do they? But then again, they don't give a shit.
Yeah, Plantinga's warrant of Christian belief is one, and that even Craig holds highly in regard as far as here. And again, Craig talks about the knowing and the showing difference as being a Christian. Is that you can know that you're a Christian, but to show you're a Christian, he would point to rationality as being the prime mover of people.
What does that even mean? First off, Christian is just a label that you slap on yourself. It's what leads to a lot of holier than thou arguments, and that's pointless. I don't care if you're a Christian. I don't care if you're a Muslim. I don't care if you're a Jew. I care if what you believe is actually true in the real world, and I care if you can back it up with any demonstrable evidence that you've got. And, well, in 40 or whatever years of looking at any of these claims, for any theist who can actually back up their faith, I have never seen one that could. Not in any way that convinced me that they had any clue what the hell they were talking about. This is why I'm not at all interested in, well, it sounds good to me theology. I don't care what sounds good to you. I care what is actually true in the demonstrable reality that we all share. I care what you can show is actually true for everyone. Not for you, not for Christians, for reality. Otherwise, you're off in Oprah's Your Truth stupidity, There is no your truth. There is only the truth. If you don't have the truth, then you have no truth at all. People need to get the fuck over themselves. They really do.
Well, likewise, classical apologetics does not substitute reason for faith. We're just automatons of reason. We write down our premise 1, premise 2, then a conclusion, and whatever happens in there, that's the only wiggle room for faith is moving to your conclusion.
Except it should. Now, granted, I'm not saying to base your epistemic standards on philosophy because that's just a mistake waiting to happen. But when it comes to the evidence, it is what you ought to believe. There should be no faith involved at all. I was looking at some of the comments to this video, and you can go look yourself, and they were pointing this out too. This is basically, don't think, just believe. And no, hard pass. Never do that on anything, and I do mean anything. Faith, the kind of religious Hebrews 11:1 faith that they push, that should never be a part of your life, ever. This is exactly where the religious go wrong. Faith is not a virtue. It never has been, and it never will be. And basing your life on faith is only going to make you look stupid, mostly because you're being stupid doing it. Now, yes, I know this is an internal dialogue, two Christians talking to each other about the things that they believe in common. But if you want it to remain internal, then you shouldn't post it in a publicly accessible place where anybody can watch it and comment. Some of these theists will figure that out eventually, won't they? But some won't. And to be fair, I have seen atheists embarrass themselves when they post stuff and figure everybody else is just automatically going to agree with them because they figure everybody in their audience is just like them. And they're just wrong. That's kind of a human issue, but it is an issue nonetheless.
Well, classical apologists regard some of the belief as essential to sound faith to be demonstrated by reason, but faith itself includes beliefs that cannot be demonstrated.
Then they should not be held, period. Now, granted, I don't think any of the beliefs of classical theism or classical apologetics, or really any religious beliefs at all, can be rationally demonstrated. I'd love to see anyone show that any of it can be. I mean, the actual religious beliefs, not their thoughts about reality. Stuff that you can prove actually happened or really exists, especially the supernatural stuff. Go ahead and do that, because I don't think you can. They love to say that they're being rational, but I've never actually seen anything they believe that was based on actual rationality. Certainly it's not based on reason or evidence or anything like that. It's all based on their feelings and nothing more. It's what they want to believe. And that's not rational. Because if it is rational, then you don't need faith to begin with. Faith is the very antithesis of rationality. I don't think you should ever have faith for anything, ever, period. Again, we're talking specifically about Hebrews 11:1 faith, and that's not something that anyone with a brain ought to have. So explain why you do.
Again, what is the main definition of faith? It's trust.
No, it's not. This is why I keep pointing at Hebrews 11:1, because that is the only place in the Bible where faith is explicitly defined. So let's trot it out. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. There's nothing in there about trust. It's the substance of things hoped for, not trusted in, hoped for. It's what you want to believe. It's the evidence of things not seen. You know, your imagination, the stuff in your head. You can't get evidence for anything that you can't detect or objectively examine. This is what faith is, and any theist who rejects that, they are rejecting the Bible. Deal with it. They are trying to redefine it because they know on some level that faith needs to be more than wishes and dreams. But that's not what the Bible says, is it? Nope, it's very, very specific. It's not trust, it's desire. I mean, even if you want to call it trust, trust in what? Trust that the things in your head are true? Things that you can't demonstrate are real? That's stupid, but that's all that they have. These are just word games, nothing else. Don't let them get away with it. What is it that they trust, and how do they prove that those things are real? They won't have any answers for that, will they?
And when we do our terrible trust falls, that you don't trust people at your job site, but you still have to do it because HR is telling you to. You're trusting the people behind you to have your back, and so that's what the purpose allegedly of that demonstration is for. And so when Jesus says, "I'm the way, the truth, and life, no man can come to the Father except through me," well, the trust is in the coming to the Father through him.
And how do you demonstrate that? Because that was a good example, whether he knows it or not. It proves what a bunch of nonsense everything else he said was. Because if you're trusting another person to catch you when you fall in this case, then you can actually put that to the test. You can show that they are, in fact, trustworthy. Or not, depending on what happens. So how do we do that with Jesus? Because you can't even prove that Jesus is real. You can't prove that God is real. You can't prove that there is a heaven. All of these are just wishful thinking, again as defined in Hebrews 11:1. There is no trust here because there's nothing demonstrably real to trust in. I bet we couldn't get him to admit to that, though, could we?
What titration, what scratch test, what malleable property can we put on that? How can we demonstrate that through a law of non-contradictions? Unless if Jesus said, you can go anywhere you want, just not through me. That would be a contradiction in terms. But no, we have to trust that Jesus is the way, that he will be faithful, that he will be trustworthy in that demonstration of his power, and he's evidenced us that by his resurrection and everything that's happened from there.
No, he hasn't, because again, you are just taking that on faith. There is no demonstrable resurrection. You just really want it to be true. So we've looked at what faith means, and it isn't what he wants to pretend that it is. We can also look at trust, which the dictionary defines as firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of someone or something. Yet he has nothing or no one demonstrably real to place his trust in. So what he's talking about isn't trust. He's talking about blind faith. My book says a thing. So what? That doesn't make it real. Putting your trust in a god is like putting your trust in Harry Potter. Well, Harry Potter's going to save us all from Voldemort. I trust him. Yeah, screw you. There is no good reason to believe that Harry Potter is going to do anything because Harry Potter is just a made-up character in a book of fiction. You know, just like God, just like Jesus. By all means, prove me wrong by producing demonstrable evidence that any of these things are real. This is why we have to keep insisting that they prove that their claims are true. The burden of proof is on them. Provide demonstrable evidence. Give us something that we can study. Because if you can't, then this isn't trust. This is faith. It's wishful thinking. It's being an absolute idiot. And that is nothing at all to be proud of.
Well, moreover, faith is more than an assent of the mind to beliefs. It is a response of the will to God.
Empty claim. This is why it's often interesting to watch them talk to each other, because all of their filters are down. Out in the real world, beyond their echo chambers, they might not talk like that. They might realize that they're likely to get challenged if they do. The language that they use inside of their religious bubble and the language that they use outside of it are often very, very different. Inside, they can just spew faith-based nonsense, and everyone is almost certain to agree with them. And that's one reason they don't want to talk to us, because we're going to question their very preconceptions, and they don't want that. They want to believe what they want to believe, and if everyone else around them believes it, as you'd probably find in a church or other religious gathering, then they can just state confidently that which is absolute nonsense anywhere else. Faith doesn't make it true. You've got to get over that.
And this is something that reason cannot produce.
You said it, not me, because you are being irrational. They are trying to have their cake and eat it too, and it doesn't work that way. If you're going to be rational, then you have to give up the Hebrew-style faith. If you want to keep the Hebrew-style faith, then you have to give up rationality. You just can't have it both ways.
Right, right. And so the classical apologist says faith is more than just this rational kind of belief. There's a volitional aspect of it, a response of the will to God. And so when we say that, well, the classical apologist is saying that, it's only this rational thing. No, it's more than that. And they understand that it's more than that.
He's doing it too, because they aren't looking for truth. They are looking for comfort. They just want this stuff to be true, and once they have concluded for really awful reasons that it is true, without bothering to check it out intellectually to see if it is, then they can just rationalize back to their own blind faith anytime that they want. And that's dumb. They think it's true because they want it to be true. But what you want is irrelevant. What is true is true. If it's not true, then no matter how much you wish it was true, it's still not. Truth is not conditional on your belief, your faith, or your assent. Truth exists beyond you, beyond me, beyond anyone. Even if you disbelieve the truth, it's still true. You just have to be able to prove that it's true first. You have to be able to provide that evidence, and the religious, they are not at all interested, are they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, if you look at people who mapped the human genome, you had people that from those groups that went from completely atheist to at least theistic and saying, listen, all I did was put A, B's, and C's and a few E's in this lineup, and all of a sudden, I have a belief system here that is unattainable by me anymore, and that's of no designer. And so I see design in this.
He is, of course, talking about Francis Collins, who didn't come to his religious beliefs because of his biological background. Because if you look at the actual statistics, biologists have the lowest rate of belief in a god of any science. It's 5.5%. Physicists and astronomers come in at 7.5%. So clearly, biologists do not believe in God because they look at biology and say, well, God done it. That's just nonsense. This is what happens when you actually care about the truth. You go and check it out and see if the data matches your claims, and in this case, a 10-second Google search proves that he is absolutely wrong. But they don't care, do they? They just really want to believe it, and they take a single example, a poor example in my opinion, and then just extrapolate that it's true for everybody, which demonstrably it's not.
Now, did that person sit down and, write out their premise and conclusion? Well, no, it seems to be an experiential form of the work that they produced in order to get them to that belief. And you do have Christians who have come out of that as well. But I'm talking just in particular here of a single person.
See, what'd I tell you? But Francis Collins said that he went out into the woods and saw a waterfall frozen in 3 parts, and that convinced him that God was real. Now, that's probably not the only thing that did it. He's not that dumb. But that was the defining feature that made him a Christian. And yes, it is as stupid as it sounds. Because this isn't an experience. It's an interpretation of an experience. You'll see that all the time. Christians will say, well, I had an experience with God. Really? Do tell. Honestly, just listen to them and it becomes really obvious. There is the thing that happened to them, and then there's all the baggage that they just pile on top of that thing to get them where they really wanted to go. I don't get it, therefore God. That's all it is. Because if you start digging deeper and ask them how they know it was God, they will start to get upset. The God part is their emotional security blanket. They just want that part to be real. They can't demonstrate it or anything, but it becomes baked into the experience through repetition of the retelling. They'll insist that all kinds of bizarre stuff happened. Yeah, stuff was just flying around the room. And then you ask somebody else who was there who doesn't share those beliefs or preconceptions, and they're going to look at you funny. These are people who don't understand how the human mind works. And really, they don't want to either.
Yeah, good.
This was kind of what I expected. They really want these things to be true, and because they're in a religious echo chamber, or in this case, a religious podcast with religious viewers, at least I'm assuming, they don't have anyone pointing out their unsupported preconceptions if they don't pay attention to the comments. It's true because they say so, and they're just reinforcing their own delusions. But that's not how it works if you're actually after the truth, which I think we should all know by now, they just aren't. They don't care. Now, this is one place where I kind of get tired of how at least some atheist content creators operate, where they just let the theists run around with the goalposts and accept all of the unsupported crap, and then they debate them on doctrinal issues or whatever. Well, what's the point of that if none of their beliefs are actually true to begin with? I'm not going to debate what God says in the Bible if you haven't shown that God is real first. In fact, that is the first stop in every single discussion with a theist, and not one has ever successfully made it past that. Absolutely everything that they do, everything they believe, it all rests on that one bit of blind faith. Knock that out and the whole thing comes tumbling down. They need to be able to support that, and they simply can't. And if they can't, then the discussion is over. They failed. Go away. Now, granted, a fair number of atheist YouTubers just want to have these conversations, and if they stop the theists dead on prove God is real, then nobody would ever talk to them. But I honestly don't see anything wrong with that. I am not going to give anyone false hope and take my eyes off the ball. If your entire belief system is based on your God being real, then you need to prove that your God is real. If you can't do that, you lost. Go away. I'm not interested in playing these stupid games. Where is your evidence, and how do I examine it objectively for myself? If you don't have an answer, if you can't provide what I'm asking for, then you are wasting my time. You're wasting everyone's time. And I really get tired of my time getting wasted, don't you?